The polls closed in Maryland roughly 3 minutes ago, Casey, and already it's not looking good for Dan Cox. We're just getting some new reporting tonight from the Associated Press.
Yeah, the Associated Press has already called this race for Wes Moore. So why don't we go back to Larry Miller right now? Okay, so we're going to wait and get to Larry, but this just happened.
Yeah, he even said, Larry mentioned, a couple of minutes before the polls closed.
Yeah, they were pretty confident
that
this was going to be Moore's night to make history. AP has just called the Maryland gubernatorial race for Wes Moore, which would make him Maryland's first African-American governor, the third African-American governor in this country's history. We're going to go back to Larry Miller in just a little bit when we can. You're watching our election night coverage here on WUSA 9. Are we going to get a little context from our guests, shall we? Are we doing that? What are we doing now?
Yeah, one of our goals tonight is just to tell you what's happening, of course, with this election, but why.
All right, to do that, we're bringing in some of the brightest minds in our area to help give that some context. And joining us now are Cheryl Laird and David Carroll. Both join us from the University of Maryland. Cheryl Laird is an associate professor of government and politics. David Carroll is an associate professor in the Department of Government and Politics. I trust you all know each other well.
Yes. This is not our first.
We could sense that.
This is not your first rodeo. So why don't we start with the information that's just in, the AP calling the Maryland governor's race for Wes Moore. And we've been talking here, no surprise here amongst you two experts. You said that Moore actually had this when he won the primary.
I think when he won the primary and when Cox won the Republican primary, I think basically that put us where we are tonight.
Absolutely. I think Cox is a bit more on the conservative lean with respect to where he is, to where the state of Maryland is, even for the Republican Party. I think it might have been an overestimation of how that would play. But in primary elections, typically you have the most loyal to the party turning out. If that base are people who are very much aligned with Trump, they probably leaned with a candidate that was more similar in kind. I think Kelly Schultz might have made this a more competitive race for the Republican Party, but Wes Moore is also a very favored individual in the state.
So Cheryl, what can national Democrats learn from Wes Moore's campaign? You know, we've seen Joe Biden there. We saw former President Barack Obama. You had the vice president coming in as well. He got this special treatment from these folks. So can we glean anything from how he campaigned?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's signaling a lot about the future of the Democratic Party, even on the national level, right? Gubernatorial office is often an opportunity for someone to move up the ranks, potentially run for higher office, and could be headed even into the presidency in some years to come. And I think if we're thinking about the future of the Democratic Party, one where people have talked about a very establishment set of individuals, older individuals being at the top of the ticket, even particularly the President of the United States, that he's speaking to a future not only of demographically of where the party is leaning, but also even changes going on in Maryland. Maryland's kind of a microcosm of the larger United States shifts and changes that we're seeing within recent history.
He's a young governor. He's got a young family, 2 young children, a political newcomer, obviously has served the nation, and he's running or was running on this anti-poverty platform, talking a lot about leaving no person behind. And a lot of people are feeling left behind as we're trying to plot forward an equitable immersion from this pandemic.
Yes. I think he was very successful in uniting the Democratic Party. He won the primary, but if you go back and look at the election returns, he didn't have close to 50% of the vote. He was running against several other credible candidates. But what he was able to do in the months since then is stress issues like the one you mentioned that Democrats broadly agree with, and that resonates even with independent voters. And it looks like that's been a successful strategy for him.
Oh, no, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So let's talk about, both of you can touch on this. You're talking about a guy who has no experience in government. So what are sort of the expectations moving forward? Because he promised a lot. So the bar seems to be really high.
He has a very democratic legislature to work with. You know, President Biden, by contrast, to take example everyone has been following, he can't lose 1 vote in the Senate, you know, and he's done. Moore should have a more favorable set of circumstances in Annapolis. You make a good point that he is a newcomer in some ways, but although he hasn't held office, he's been engaged in public policy for a while, when education reform, poverty, other issues. So he's not new to the issues. He has made contacts with a lot of people in Maryland politics. So I think you're right that expectations for him are high, but he has some favorable circumstances.
Yeah.
He also didn't shy away from being with President Biden at a time when a lot of people have been keeping their distance from the president.
Absolutely, right? And thinking about like where people are in approval of Biden's performance at this point, many have kind of distanced themselves, especially in closer races. But in this case, it actually is probably a good signal to the leadership within the party, right? The respect for the status quo, respect for the establishment, especially an elder within the party, and the positionality that he has. And additionally, I think in terms of his ability to move in the state legislature, I think he'll have a lot of space to really kind of have latitude there. One, because it's Democratic. Two, he's not inheriting often what we see of African American people who move into positions of power, which is considered the hollow prize, right? Yeah. It's not a problematic circumstance. The budget is in a good position, in a good space. So really it's a matter of maintaining that over time in the administration.
Was the state poised for this to happen now? I mean, as we take a look at the demographics of Maryland, it has become a majority minority state. And this signals the first black governor for the state at a time when the state looks more like Wes Moore and other people of color.
Absolutely. I think seeing even the top two people in the Democratic ticket were Tom Perez and Wes Moore, and particularly with Latinos within Maryland really siding more with Tom Perez, and Wes Moore getting a lot more of the African American vote, but a consolidation of that now once he's been designated as the Democratic candidate, and a clear signal about where we are moving, and even for projections for the U.S. going into 2050, right? Like that there is this argument about how we're going to see more people of color within the U.S., the demographic of majority minority being like national, that we are kind of really a microcosm of what that's going to look like, and Wes Moore being really the kind of leadership of that.
Yeah, we want to point out as well that on your screen you're looking at the Wes Moore, what they're calling a victory party there in Baltimore, Maryland. Presumably we're going to be hearing from him shortly, but talk about a quick decision by the Associated Press.
Yeah, it was
closed just
minutes
ago.
It was 5 minutes after the polls closed that we got this information.
The race for governor.
5 minutes.
I know, but you know, this is going to be a contrast. There are going to be races that we won't know for days, and they will shy away from calling for days. But this was just not a close race. It really wasn't. I mean, and Maryland is a Democratic-leaning state, all things being equal. So you're mentioning before, Wes Moore was happy to be seen with President Biden. President Biden is not popular nationally. I think if Wes Moore were running in Michigan, he might make a different choice. But he's still more popular in Maryland than in the country as a whole. And I think Cheryl made good points that he wants to show connection to the current leadership of the Democratic Party. So it wasn't really dangerous for him to be seen with President Biden the way if he were running in Ohio, it might be more problematic.
Can we talk about his lieutenant governor as well? Aruna Miller, the first immigrant, the first, and not the first woman. The first woman to be lieutenant governor was Kathleen Kennedy Townsend. But Aruna Miller is making history tonight too.
Right, is an Indian American, Asian American. She is also a historic figure in her way. And I think lieutenant governors don't usually get that much attention, but I think they work together fairly well as a team. And it will be interesting to see, the amount of influence they have really depends on their relationship with the governor. A governor can give a lieutenant governor something to do, or can marginalize them. And we'll have to see if they remain a team once they get into office.
They appear to be a partnership, and so as you say, we'll see how this all goes. Don't go anywhere.
Yeah, we got a lot more to talk about.
Stay here.
We want to get back to our Larry Miller now, who has been with the Wes Moore campaign in Baltimore. And Larry, what are they celebrating yet with this news from the Associated Press calling the race for Wes Moore?
Yeah, no doubt. They've been celebrating since we first got here, and the news that we just got from the Associated Press calling the race for Wes Moore has only turned the room even more electric than what it was prior. I've had the opportunity to cover the Wes Moore campaign from the very beginning, and this campaign was different in the way in which it was structured. They were very disciplined in their messaging, they were very clear in their tasks, and they also had a very well-structured plan in terms of what they wanted to do, how they wanted to do it, and how they planned to get the votes necessary for them to win the primary, and now for them to win this election. We now have Governor-elect Wes Moore and Lieutenant Governor-elect Aruna Miller. And for so many people in this state, this is a big deal for them. when we think about representation, how people see themselves, where people see themselves, the fact that the state will have its first African-American governor and an immigrant American who will be representing the office of lieutenant governor, for voters that I spoke with today, they said that for them was a big deal. But they also are very clear that they have work to do once they get to Annapolis. There are issues of the economy that they're concerned about, taxes, particularly in Meriden, and how those taxes affect our retirees. And they also want them to deal with schools, improving the quality of education in the state of Maryland, and making sure, as the theme that we've heard from the Wes Moore campaign has been from the very beginning, that no one in the state gets left behind. But no doubt, a lot of excitement here. They were hopeful from the very beginning that they had the votes, that they were going to be able to do what they needed to do in terms of this campaign. One of the things that we saw from this campaign early on is that they were focusing on every single county, all 23 of Maryland's counties, and they were going to those areas that were deeply red, where there was essentially very few Democrats, because they said they wanted to make sure that this campaign was seen in every corner of the state, and that Wes came across as and connected with voters, Republicans, Democrats, even independents as well. So it looks like that strategy has been successful. We will wait to hear what the campaign will say about the traditional call that we expect that Wes Moore will have with Dan Cox. I'm going to try to pull someone over from the campaign staff, but everyone just kind of ran away about 2 or 3 minutes ago as soon as this news was made. So we'll see what we can get you momentarily.
Hopefully you can hear us, Larry, but really quickly, because yes, you have been with the Moore campaign from the very beginning, covering this campaign. And what I find fascinating, and you touched on this before, they've been very measured in terms of how they campaign and very cautiously optimistic, not taking any of these votes or potential voters for granted.
You're right, Lorenzo. In that last interview that I had with him just a few weeks ago, I asked the question about, how are they feeling on the campaign trail? What are they seeing on the campaign trail? And Wes Moore told me very pointedly that they were always running this race like they were 10 points behind, and every day waking up, trying to figure out what they needed to do to make up those 10 points. And that sort of strategy clearly worked for them, because they were willing to go to places and engage voters that traditionally we wouldn't see Democrats do, a strategy that appeared to work. But another thing that I think is important to mention, I asked the question about the history potentially that could be made as well. That's something that Mr. Moore typically didn't kind of address initially. You kind of had to pry that information out of him. But when we started to kind of dig into that, he was clear that the potential history that was made, or that has been made here tonight, was not lost on him. But he's committed to the work and making sure that he represents all Marylanders, making sure no one feels left behind. Guys?
Tonight is the night for celebration, for standing in the moment of the milestone in the history. Tomorrow we'll be drilling down on the specifics of what Governor-elect Wes Moore will do for the state of Maryland.